Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dana Thompson. I am a project officer for the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council. We welcome you to the second day of the Pennsylvania Community Alliance Summit. We'd just like to start off with some quick notes. If you would like to enter comments or aha moments or things you found interesting in the chat box, please feel free to do that. We'd love to have some discussions going on among the audience. And if you have questions directly for the panelists, please place those in the Q&A box. At the end, near the end of the session, we will offer to open up for discussion. If you wish to speak then, please go to the little hand symbol and raise your hand so we can unmute you. At this time, not to hold anything up, I'm going to turn over the session. This is on sexual violence and post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd like to introduce you to LeVine Kennedy, or he goes by Lee.
Great morning, everybody. I hope everyone is well. My name is LeVine Kennedy. You can call me Lee for short. I am a sexual violence counselor, crisis advocate, as well as an educator. I work for the only rape crisis center in the city, WAR, WOAR, Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence. We're located in Center City, Philadelphia, 1617 John F. Kennedy Boulevard. Today, everybody, we're going to have an interesting panel. Today with us, I have Chanel Santiago, Allison Stanko Aguilar, Jane Kim, Madeline Mitchell, and Michelle McDermott. To tell you a little bit more about myself, I want to make sure I introduce myself fully and formally. My pronouns are he, him, his. And also, I am about 6 foot tall, 230 pound African American man. So just wanted to make sure I gave that one line description of myself for anybody who may need it. Now I'm going to turn it over to my panelists for them to introduce themselves. And for me, just to make it easier for my panelists, I will call on Chanel Santiago to introduce themselves first.
Good morning. Thank you, Lee, for the introductions. My name is Chanel Santiago. I am a Army combat veteran. I work for the VA at the Norristown Vet Center. My role at the Vet Center is outreach. My long title is a Veteran Outreach Program Specialist, but outreach is good enough. My office, we provide readjustment counseling services to combat veterans and also survivors of military sexual trauma. We can also see their families. And as far as us being VA employees, we are not located in VA medical centers. We are community based, and my office is in Norristown. We're in a strip mall. We're in between hoagies and ice cream. So you can eat lunch, get your therapy, and get dessert before you go home. So thank you so much for having me here.
And if you don't mind, Chanel, I don't know if I missed that or not, but could you announce your pronouns and give the audience a one-line description of yourself?
Sure. She, her, and one line description of myself. I am an African American female. I'm about 5'9" and 100 and something pounds.
Good enough, for sure. Okay, we're going to call on Allison now.
Good morning, everyone. Chanel did such a great job of explaining who we are at the Norristown Vet Center, so I won't belabor that. I am also an Army veteran, as well as the director of the Norristown Vet Center, and also one of my specialties is providing therapy for military sexual trauma survivors. And I use pronouns she and her, and I am a 5'8" white middle-aged woman.
think did I miss that or were you muted?
Michelle, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. What you say? You broke up a bit.
I just didn't know if you had called on someone else or if you were muted.
Yeah, I did call on someone else, you can definitely go. You can definitely most certainly introduce yourself.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle McDyer. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white female in my 30s. I have blonde hair and I'm wearing glasses today. I am the Prevention Education and Outreach Manager at Mission Kids Child Advocacy Center. We are located in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, which is also the same county as I know Chanel said in Norristown. We serve child victims of abuse and also do prevention, education, and outreach to adults and children in our community.
Amazing. Thank you. And Madeline.
Hi, I'm Madeline Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white female in my late 20s. I have like dark blonde hair. I am a forensic interviewer at Mission Kids Child Advocacy Center. So my job is to interview children who may be victims of crimes. I also interview adults with disabilities or special consideration.
Okay, thank you for everybody for your introductions. So what you're hearing, everybody, is a bunch of amazing individuals who do amazing work.
I'm sorry, I didn't
Oh
get
yeah,
introduced. I didn't know if you called on me. Sorry.
yes, I'm sorry about that. I apologize. I thought I was covering for you, but yeah, I did call a little earlier. But yes, please introduce yourself, Jane.
No worries, it's all text. My name is Jane Kim. I am also from Mission Kids. I am the program director overseeing our direct services, advocacy, as well as forensic interviewer. My pronouns are she and her and hers. And I am 5'2" Asian female.
All right. Thank you, Jane, for that.
Introduce
Thank you.
myself quickly as well, just to make sure.
Okay.
So, hi everybody, my name is Katie Nordhoff. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Prevention and Outreach Specialist for SARC Lebanon, the Sexual Assault Resource and Counseling Center. We are the designated rape crisis center for both Lebanon and Schuylkill counties. And I am a 5'1" white female with short blonde hair in my late 20s. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for having us.
And thank everybody, literally thank you for, just making those introductions really smooth and getting everybody included in that. And now we can say we have a bunch of individuals who do a bunch of amazing work. So just moving on, just wanted to make sure they were all informed on our guidelines for this discussion. First things first, we want to make sure everybody maintains confidentiality. We're here in this group discussing some really sensitive topics. So I want to make sure that we feel safe in this space. So please make sure to maintain anything that anything you heard here stays here. Unless it's, again, education, awareness, things like that, any personal information should stay here. How I like to call it, embrace discomfort. We may be hearing a lot of things, again, not triggering things, but sometimes you may hear some things that may not quite sit so well with you, and you may want to explore that a bit. So just making sure that we understand what embracing discomfort means. Speak from the I, try your best not to generalize things. Also ask questions as they come up. They pointed to the chat box for that. We're going to definitely let our panelists get through their thoughts and ideas before we decide to, again, say anything that may interrupt their flow. So again, please try your best not to interrupt. Again, reserve any questions for the chat. And please engage in self-care, whatever it is you need to do to make yourself feel whole. I want to make sure that everyone, in this panel feels as though they have the opportunity or the leeway to, exit this discussion whenever they need to, or take a break from this discussion whenever you need to. So there's no reason for you to stay if you're feeling uneasy, uncomfortable, anything like that. So just want to make sure I throw those things out there to make sure that people know. Again, please take care of yourself. I want you leaving here at the same exact rate or feeling better than what it was when you came in. So a few goals for the panel so that everybody knows where we're going at. We want to understand why this space or this information, this topic is so important. We want to recognize the common experiences of individuals. Everyone here has experienced some form of another in the field of sexual violence prevention and intervention, trauma, and things like that. So that's where we all compound at. That's where our intersection is. So we want to see what are those common experiences. And last, we want to recognize the space necessary for reform and any laws, policies, or any funding that may be out there. So far so good. We're doing pretty well on time. I would like to briefly display a quick PowerPoint. Um, this will be a Sexual Violence 101 PowerPoint. It is something that will be used as a brief framework for individuals within this conversation to have something to base some of this foundational knowledge off of. So again, as I said before, that's everyone's intersection. Everybody here and that's on this panel deals with sexual violence prevention, intervention, and again, being trauma informed in that way. So again, today, just wanted to present you with some quick information on Sexual Violence 101. Now, sexual violence is an act that anytime a person is forced, coerced, or manipulated into any unwanted sexual activity. Now, sexual violence is not necessarily the term. It's actually an umbrella term that encompasses everything under that realm, where it be sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, stalking, things like that. So this is not something that is a for sure, definite term. This is something that varies actually state to state. So this is something that we may need to check. There's things are different here in PA than what they are in New Jersey and what have you. So another look at it, just in case, a lot of people, sometimes those words, force, coerce, manipulation, they tend to people don't tend to understand them unless they're, given some examples, and rightfully so. So here's some really, really simple examples of it. So again, coercion is pretty much forcing a person. So and for lack of a better word, if Katie were to be my mother and I would say, Katie, can I go outside? Or Mom, can I go outside? And she's like, no, no, no. Mom, can I go outside? No, no, no. And I'm just like, beating her to the ground with the question, to the point where, she's like literally pulling her hair out. And she's like, you know what? Go outside. Now, again, that wasn't enthusiastically telling me to go outside. She pretty much was strong-armed into it. I mentally wore her down. So again, that's another way to look at forcing, instead of people always looking at the act as a physical, threatening, full-on violent act. Sometimes this is just those things that, again, just wearing a person down and not accepting no for an answer. Manipulation, tricking a person, so guilt tripping them, making a person, diminishing it, minimizing it, lying about your age, a debilitation, something like that. Pressure, really easy to understand that. Intimidation and violence is also harming another individuals. Rape's new definition by the FBI since 2013. So this new definition is not even older than my son. So the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. That or object part, I want to make sure I point out, at a point in time, technically by law, a woman or anybody that did not have a penis, I'll say, would not technically be, it wouldn't be seen as a rape, because again, it was, the definition was penile penetration, vaginally, orally, or anally. Just really brief. It didn't say anything about consent. It didn't say anything about foreign objects, and it definitely didn't say anything about whether or not sexual orientation, gender, what have you, had anything to do with it. Okay, this dynamic of it. All three of these things need to be in place in order for sexual violence to continue to happen. However, the only thing that needs to be in place in order for it to start is opportunity. The easiest way I can explain this to you, if you're looking at power, that may be true, but again, individuals that have power, they can still wait for the opportunity. That'll be an easier pass, I guess you could say, versus you utilizing your power and people actually being able to see what you're doing there. So, quick metaphor: the lion is the self-proclaimed king of the jungle. They have all the power in their jaws and claws to take down any animal it wants to by force. However, it waits in the grass for the opportunity to strike, It waits for the perfect opportunity to strike. And it also weeds out who's the most vulnerable in the group. So a lion is a predator, and in the way that I teach this, that is predatory behavior also shown by individuals who commit these acts. Really quickly, the continuum is from no physical contact to maximum physical contact. So you see a lot of things on here. I won't go through everything, but there's a lot of things on here that, again, I hate to put things on a continuum, but again, I'm just showing how things progress as time goes on, or how an individual may start with a smaller act and, increase it, increase it to a larger act. Consent, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what this is. Just understanding this quick, brief part is permission, approval, or agreement. The reason why I brought this up is because this is really, really key with the information that we're talking about today, especially with us being in the PA Disabilities Alliance Summit. So consent cannot be given if a person is DUUI, drunk, underage, under the influence of any drug, unconscious, or if it's incest, or the person is incapable of understanding the act that you're going to get into. So again, that's super critical here. And the reason why I'm going to explain it in this kind of way is because, for example, my son, he's on the spectrum. He may not understand this act that he's going to get into. So technically, he can't really grant consent for this act to happen. He doesn't know exactly what he's going to do. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing this thing? He has no clue. They don't even have any prerequisite knowledge about this. So again, just wanted to make sure that that part was really highlighted, because it's critical that we really understand that for the reason that we're coming here today. And again, last but not least, victim blaming. This is a devaluing act where the person that was the victim of a crime is held as wholly or partially responsible for the wrongful conduct that's committed against them. So I got a couple, memes, I guess you could call them, down here, where people are, pretty much saying obviously very vulgar things, like don't get raped, whereas, that's not something that you can prevent. You could dress up in a full snowsuit and a predator will still be a predator, so just making sure we understand that there's no such thing as wrong clothes, using drugs or drinking, wrong place, wrong time, or how the victim acted. The onus is always on the individual to get consent. The onus is always on the individual to understand if this person is capable of giving consent. The onus is always on that individual to have self-control. So it's never the victim's fault, never. That's why. So besides that, we're not going to really do questions right now. My apologies. We're going to save those to the end. But for now, what we're going to do is open up the panel, the floor for the panelists. So we're going to start with our first question. The first question is revolving around the statute of limitations. Again, feel free for any of the panelists to jump in and chime in to answer this question. The statute of limitations has been under scrutiny and reform in PA. VAWA funding has also been seen circumstances that have left organizations and victims feeling nervous and vulnerable. The question is, what are some of the ways that the statute of limitations reform and VAWA funding can become more victim-centered? So how can those two things become more victim-centered?
So I'm happy to start talking about this, and these are great questions to raise. So for people who might not be necessarily in this field or is familiar with sexual violence issues, VAWA stands for the Violence Against Women Act. And that is federal legislation that provides funding to sexual assault centers and domestic violence centers and programs in every community designed to respond to, support, and prevent these issues from occurring. So the problem that can sometimes come up with funding for agencies such as mine, such as Lee's, that support survivors of sexual violence is when it becomes politicized, we start losing support for people who need it every day. One of the most important things just every person can go out into their community and stress with the people they know, but also their local and state legislators. Sexual violence is not a partisan issue. Sexual violence is something that happens to people of every race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, socioeconomic bracket, everybody is struggling with this. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 2 trans and gender non-conforming people. So we all know someone who's been affected by this. So for everyday people, the number one thing we can do is make sure everyone in our community is on the same page. Sexual violence is not a partisan issue, it's not a political issue, it's a human issue. And it's an issue that needs to be guided by compassion. And that goes for statute of limitation reform as well. We want to expand the amount of time, the conditions under which victims can report that something has happened. We know that there's lots of reasons people don't always report right away. They could be scared. They could fear that no one will believe them or someone will retaliate against them for telling. When it's children, they might be dependent on the person who's hurting them, or they really love them and they don't want them to get in trouble. They just want the abuse to stop. Children raised in sexually abusive families might not even recognize that what's happening isn't normal and acceptable because it's all they've ever known. So when we talk about things like reforming or expanding the statute of limitations, what we're talking about is having some understanding and compassion for why survivors don't always behave in these quote unquote perfect or expected or timely ways, and making sure our laws reflect the realities of what they're dealing with.
Really, really insightful information. Thank you for your input. Any of the other panelists like to chime in on that?
I just wanted to thank Katie. I think that was a great overall description. Exactly, we're here to talk from Mission Kids from a child's perspective. And we know that, as Katie said, this is something that happens in every community, every socioeconomic class, regardless of where you live, where you work, where you go to school. This is something that kids face. We know that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience abuse before their 18th birthday. And like Katie said, there's a lot of barriers to disclosure. 90% of the time, children know the person. It's usually someone that they know and that they trust. So that could be a barrier, which would lead to a delayed disclosure, or maybe they don't disclose until they're older. So for child advocacy centers, we advocate for statute of limitations reform so that children and adults are given that opportunity to see their day in court, or to be able to seek civil services as well. So thank you, Katie. That was a great description.
Definitely. If anybody doesn't know, statute of limitations, last time I checked, they expanded it to, again, age 50 for anybody who's under the age of 18 years old. Previously, before that, that person only had, whether you were under the age of 18 or above the age of 18, you only had until the age of 30 to report and 2 years to file a civil suit. So, again, that's just a little bit of information on that, but these panelists did an amazing job wrapping up that question, if you don't mind. Again, if any other panelists want to chime in, again, feel free, but we definitely have more questions to go. So we'll definitely have more information and more space and opportunity for you to chime in.
Lee, if I could share real quick on the veteran side of things.
Yeah.
You know, I think the biggest goal that we have for our general community is that you're not alone in overcoming any sort of military sexual trauma, and that, you know, it's people of all backgrounds, including, you know, physical size, age, race, sexual orientation, era of service, rank, sexual orientation. The statistics that we've been looking at through the VA is 4 out of 10 men are reporting to Veterans Affairs that they have been a survivor of military sexual trauma. And 1 in 3 women veterans are sharing that they've experienced military sexual trauma. One of the good things that has come out with legislation and moving forward is if someone, due to different struggles, they may have been discharged in other than honorable status, which historically would mean they're not then allowed to have any sort of VA benefits, to include medical and behavioral health care. Thankfully, that has changed, where now we're able to recognize that perhaps those struggles are specifically related to their service and the sexual trauma that occurred. And we're now able to, the VA medical centers are now able to see them and provide that health care. So I think, you know, to just kind of highlight and pick up off of what was shared already, I think the idea that you are not alone and that as a community, we need to continue to move forward.
Question, Allison. I want a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Are there any like this similar, I guess you say, laws or policies in place in the military, like around statute of limitations or anything like that?
So I can't, you know, I've been out since 2014, so so I have to be honest, I'm not, I would not be in any way looked at as an expert, but I know that there used to be a statute of limitation. I believe, and I could double check and always get back if you need to know that. I believe it is something that's up for legislation, as well as also we've been trying to get for many, many years the idea that when it is reported, it is looked at through a civilian authorities versus military authorities. Unfortunately, it has not gone through yet. It's been up many, many, many years. Recently, the Deborah Sampson Act is what was enacted to allow, again, those other than honorable discharges and some other things, care for National Guard and reservists while they're in duty status. But I could definitely get back to you if you don't mind and get that answer.
No. Actually, that was good. That actually covered the base that I was trying to get to, the fact that, you know, number one, you know, the military kind of like, you know, wants to be hands off with, you know, some of those things. As you said, you know, they looked at it from this lens as opposed to that lens, you know, and again, I almost kind of look at the military entity almost as like, you know, to a degree, the same responsibilities they should have with colleges. If you're going to recruit all of these people and bring all these people here, you need to make sure they have all the information you need. Same with, you know, colleges at Title IX, you know, military should have those same exact, you know, things in place. And, you know, everyone should know about it. It shouldn't even be a clue or a question. So for you to know what you know, I thank you. I appreciate your answer, or the answer to my question. So, just moving on, everybody, because I got another question for the panelists. It's about it's around this prevalence of sexual violence. So we all know anyone and everyone could be susceptible to sexual assault and abuse, but some communities do face a higher risk factors than others. So my question for everyone is, what are some of the key trends or observations that you are seeing within the communities that you serve and the prevalence of sexual violence? So anything that has been, you know, again, within the last 10 years, 5 years, even just something that you might have noticed over the last year that has been, you know, a commonality.
I can certainly speak pretty extensively about the LGBT community and experiences of sexual violence within that. And thanks so much for asking this question, Lee, because you're absolutely right. Anybody can experience sexual violence, but that's not the same as saying everyone experiences it equally, because they don't. And just like you were saying in that Sexual Violence 101, at the end of the day, sexual violence is a crime of opportunity. And there are social factors like lack of access to resources, discrimination, low community support that just kind of make more people available to be sexually victimized. And I can speak about LGBT communities as an example. If we're talking about a community where LGBT folks are very under-supported, there might be a pressure of secrecy around somebody's identity, that it's hard for them to live openly as they are. So if somebody sees them on a dating app or notices their mannerisms and believes that it looks more effeminate or more masculine than is expected, they can use that as a tool of coercion and say, hey, I know this secret about you. You don't want people to know it. I'll keep your secret in exchange for sexual favors. Or because they know that that person is less likely to be supported by school administrators, potentially law enforcement officers, potentially a jury, they might feel safer offending against them because they think there's a higher probability of them getting away with it. We see this show up in stats. When we look at LGBT people, we know that 1 in 3 women generally are sexually assaulted, and that's a huge number. But that number goes up to about 41% of lesbians and about 70% of bisexual women. Those are huge differences. And it has to do with how we talk about people. This totally dates me, right? But I grew up in the era of Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl. And I 100% know what image of bisexual people that song puts out. Bisexual women are promiscuous. They're looking for attention. They're dirty. If I think that about people, it gives some folks permission to harm them and feel like they can get away with it. And then if the people who investigate or the people who provide medical care or a jury of their peers believes the same things, they're a lot less likely to get the support, care, and justice they deserve. So any kind of oppression-based violence, the attitudes we as a community hold about people can increase the likelihood of violence being directed towards them and decrease the likelihood of them getting the support and care they deserve.
Thank you for your input again, Katie. I appreciate that information. I might re-ask the question just for any other panelists to chime in. Again, any key observations or trends that you are seeing within communities that you serve and the prevalence of sexual assault or violence?
I really love that Katie used the term oppressive. And when you think about the military, not all cases, but the majority of cases, whether it's harassment or assault on other military personnel, it's that use of power. So you have a private, which is the lowest of the totem pole when you come into the military, and you have a senior NCO, which can be some sort of sergeant that is in charge. They usually take advantage and use that use of power to oppress their victims and go after their victims. Sometimes you have situations where, especially if it's a male victim, maybe he's a little younger, maybe he's smaller in stature, maybe his voice is not as deep as others. That's how they end up becoming victims of their peers. So with the military, a lot of it is use of power. So if someone feels like I can overpower you or I'm your supervisor, then that's how they take advantage. And a lot of times those are most of the cases that we see when it comes to the military. It's someone abusing their power, and they totally victimize their victim. They remind them that, if you tell on me, who's going to believe you? They're going to believe me. I have 20 years in. I am the best drill sergeant at this base. Nobody's going to believe you. And that tends to happen quite a bit in the military. And it's just, oppressive. Once again, Katie, I'm going to use your word, and that abuse of power.
Wow.
And speaking more on the abuse of power, if I could,
Yeah,
it comes up a
please.
lot with communities we serve at the CAC or Child Advocacy Center. So with children, but also with people with disabilities, whether children or adults. So there's similar statistics as to like how well they know their perpetrators. So we know that people with disabilities, the perpetrator, they know them like 88 to 98% of the time. And a lot of the time, those people provide like intimate care for that person, whether it's like hygiene, basic needs like feeding them, clothing them, housing them, transportation, various types of therapy. So again, with that abuse of power, there's so much opportunity for someone to perpetrate on someone else. We also see that perpetrators sometimes seek out people with disabilities if they believe that they may not be able to report, whether they don't use verbal communication or if they believe they can't report in a credible way for like law to kind of go forward. So just to share a couple more statistics about people with disabilities that speak to like prevalence and some trends that we're seeing. We know that youth between like 12 and 19, they have more than 5 times a higher rate of experiencing violence than youth without disabilities. We also know that 57%, so more than half of people with disabilities, report 20 or more abusive events compared to people that don't have any kind of like disability or diagnosed disability. So those are some of the trends that we kind of see. And we definitely, so at the CAC, and we can speak more to this later as well. We do make a lot of accommodations for people with disabilities to make sure that they do have a safe, comfortable place to talk about what has happened to them and make reports, which was often denied to them in the past.
Thank you, everyone, for your information. Going a little bit left here from a moderator chair. That was some really good information, everybody. I mean, I kind of found myself being, a part of the audience right there. I picked up some really good, I believe some good information. So across all of this information I heard about this theme of power, somebody abusing this power, abusing this, this authority or this position that they have of control. Rarely have I heard a person that wasn't in a position of power or control or abuse or anything, or just in that position. And again, power doesn't always have to be equated to a position of authority. It could just be literally, this person is, I may be smaller than this person, but this person's knocked out cold. Or so again, power, it kind of escalates and fluctuates. So it's this theme of power that really came out. Also, these socialized roles that we all have, we're all socialized to believe and think what an individual is supposed to be like, or think like, because I heard that with Katie when she was talking about the song that she used to hear when she was younger. Understanding that how cultural values are built into the way we think. So again, if we're socialized to think these things, technically speaking, our cultural values will reflect that. And also a lot of the stereotype, the similar stuff that we've probably already heard themes of, stereotypes surrounding masculinity, femininity, individuals who identify as LGBTQ, even stereotypes around individuals with disabilities. Just the fact that, how Madeline said, an individual may prey on a person just simply because they don't think they have the capacity to explain or understand what's going on. So like I said, just for me, really, really good information. But I'm going to move on to this next question for the sake of time. We're about 35 minutes in, a little over. So COVID-19, and I want to make sure I put this out there. If anybody has suffered any kind of loss due to COVID-19, you definitely have, all of my thoughts and prayers go your way. That was unprecedented. Nobody in our lifetime, I believe, has dealt with something like that, or at least in our generation, I'll say. So again, you definitely have all my thoughts and prayers. So but this pandemic not only rocked the nation, but it rocked the entire world. During this pandemic, many services, including many of those that service victims and survivors of sexual, gender-based, and other categories of violence, were stalled or discontinued. My question for everybody: how did this standstill affect victims and victimization rates during this period?
I can start with that coming from a child advocacy center perspective. I also, just like Lee, I do want to send my condolences to anyone who's been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that child abuse did not stop due to a pandemic. We saw that there was a drastic decrease in Childline reports, which is the Pennsylvania Childline agency, is where you can send any reports of allegations of abuse or neglect. But we know that there was a 16% decrease in reports of abuse and neglect in 2020 compared to 2019. And then moving forward, reports plummeted when schools were closed, because we know that schools are the primary reporting source for children that are experiencing abuse. So reports plummeted in January 2021, reports dropped 22% compared to January 2020. So there was this feeling that maybe, oh, child abuse has stopped because kids are safe at home. But we knew that kids were not safe at home. I'm sure all the other panelists will talk about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, such as financial stressors, concerns about the health and well-being of family members, job insecurity, food insecurity, even trying to manage your job while also working with remote learning, and people were feeling isolated, maybe coping with drugs or alcohol or other maladaptive behaviors. So we knew that kids were not safe at home, yet they weren't around those safe adults like teachers, coaches, counselors. We also know that we couldn't stop providing services. So for instance, Maddie is one of our forensic interviewers at Mission Kids, and they continued to go into the office to talk to kids about what was happening to them. But we needed to find a way to pivot and still give these kids a platform and a safe place to talk about what was happening to them. So I know we're going to get into more of the resiliency piece and how we pivoted as victim service organizations, but I did just want to point out that we knew that kids were not safe at home. We knew that they needed those services. We knew that we needed to disseminate information to them. So we used something called Safe to Say PA, which is through the Attorney General's office and gives kids a semi-anonymous tip line that they can send a report if they're feeling unsafe at home or if they're worried about a friend. And then we were also able to continue providing prevention education programs for kids from our homes and provide them in their homes if they were doing remote learning, hybrid, or if they were in the classroom. But we did just face problems with funding. We had to cancel our gala, which brings in a third of our annual budget. We faced things that I'm sure a lot of other victim service agencies can speak to as well.
I'm gonna tag on what Michelle said. Beyond in terms of the child line numbers going down because mandated reporters such as teachers and also medical providers and so forth the children couldn't access them. What we also saw was changes in the type of victimization. So at Mission Kids, we provide services, majority it's for child victims of sexual abuse, but we also provide services for child victims of significant physical abuse and when they're witnesses to violent crimes. And what we have seen was there was a sharp increase of near fatalities of significant physical abuse, especially with very young infants. And we ended up interviewing a lot of their siblings who were verbal, who ended up witnessing violence either against their siblings or violence between their parents. We had a rise in witnesses in homicide cases. And we have also had a significant increase in internet exploitation cases of children being at home, being isolated, and being on the web and being accessed by people from around the country, around the world. And so we saw a significant increase in internet-based sexual exploitation cases of children very young as 6 years old. So we're not looking at teens, we're really looking at very young children. So the type of victimization has also changed significantly for the population that we serve.
I want to actually take that because that was a perfect segue, in my opinion. I want to take that and roll right into our next question, which is the challenges of the COVID-19 virus. So, again, what type of challenges did the pandemic present to organizations, victims, and survivors of violence? So, it just, everything that Jane mentioned, even from to the internet crimes, being increased, that was a challenge of COVID since people were using computers and technology now more than ever. So anybody can speak to that. What were some of those challenges and how did they present themselves to organizations, victims, and other survivors of violence?
I will just wrap up in time, kind of since you tied into the other questions, as Michelle mentioned, some of which are funding and so forth, access to mandated reporters. But I think in terms of delivery of services, when we're talking about children who are reliant on adults, right? We're providing services in a home that may actually not be safe for the child, right? We're providing therapy for a child whose abuser may very much be in the next room. So the lack of accessibility by children and also those with disability who rely on others for access to the outside world made virtual services very difficult because we had to assess their safety and we had to come up with safety plan, even when it comes providing basic services such as therapy and so forth, because we couldn't guarantee that they were in a safe place. So, so that was definitely a challenge that we had to pivot and we had to think about how to do that well.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to chime into that question?
Regarding how the veterans that we treat, how we were able to, some of the things that we started to see was definitely an increase in a lot of symptomology, right? So a lot of the PTSD or depression or anxiety symptoms really started to come up quite high. And then oftentimes what comes along with that is increased drinking or increased drug use, marriage difficulties, child rearing issues. So, a lot of folks, what we heard from continuously was being on lockdown felt like they were back in the military, and that for a lot of folks did not bring a lot of good positive memories or experiences. So, we were able to pivot quite quickly, and I'm very appreciative, and I know I'm fortunate to be able to say we were able to do that. But we definitely did see an increase of folks that were, closed cases coming back in saying, hey, this is really affecting me, and I'm thinking about everything that I've struggled with in the past, and all symptoms are increasing. So, and I think also just what was going on in the community. So there was a lot more time on FaceTime and a lot more time on Twitter and all those types of things. So what was happening in our societal context, I'll say, of the Me Too movement brought up a lot for our survivors as well, just possibly hearing some of the negative things that were being said. So again, giving them the space to process that, and again, how do we move forward? How do we really, really drive home that it's never the survivor's fault? So we definitely did see that increase.
Anybody else with any more input about those challenges that the pandemic presented for organizations, victims, or other survivors of violence? Okay, to close out with our last question. Also, throughout the pandemic, what I will say is I would almost assume at least one time we saw something or somebody or something that made us think, like, we are a resilient group of people. We can do this, we can make it. Like, something or someone inspires you, some story, some act, something. So again, this pandemic has showed us that, as communities, as individuals, as society, we can be resilient. And the question and the final closeout question is, what type of tools were used to help organizations pivot effectively and provide services to those individuals? So what tools were used for those organizations that helped organizations pivot? What was the tools that you used or the organization used?
So at Mission Kids, excuse me, we implemented what's called Teleforensic Interviews, and it's actually something that was implemented around the country as we all experienced COVID. So basically what happened for Mission Kids was children and adults would still come in to be interviewed because we didn't stop the interviews, but they would wear masks, and then we would have a computer set up in one room with the person that was being interviewed, and then myself or our other forensic interviewer would be in the other room with a computer, and we did the interview like over Zoom, as much as possible to make sure that that person was safe and our staff was safe. We did a lot of disinfecting, and we're still wearing masks during interviews. We've been doing that for a while now. And we actually were able to use teleforensic interviews in other ways. So our CAC and CACs throughout the country started using them for maybe children who don't have access to a CAC. So in very rural communities, we even used them like internationally and throughout the state. So it was actually a really cool development, and really showed like how we can adapt to whatever we need to for our clients.
Most certainly. Anybody else have anything to add to that? What tools were used? Yes.
I think that all of the digital tools that Madeline mentioned are so important. The availability of telehealth and telecommunications like we didn't have before. But I also think it's important to remember that none of it would have worked without the flexibility and resilience of the people we serve too. And when I think about our organization, that was truly the greatest resource we had to draw from. I do a lot of prevention work, just like I know Michelle does. And to see adults willing to step up in this void and say, you know what, I'm thinking about the society we're in, the society I want to step into. Let's talk about child sexual abuse. is extraordinary. These are uncomfortable topics in an uncomfortable moment for our whole world. And to see community members step into that and find the space to want to do better was really encouraging. So we could do digital prevention series and webinars, start bringing anti-racism into the work we were doing following the events of last summer. But none of it would have worked had our community members not been willing to take that brave plunge to sit in this stillness, sit in this uncomfortable moment, and find something productive out of it. It's the same with survivors. We saw our crisis hotline booming in a way it had not before because people were sitting in their trauma, just like Allison was saying, which is an obstacle, but also an opportunity because so many people took the bull by the horns, so to speak, and said, you know what, I've got this time, let's face this trauma. Let's overcome this obstacle. Let's talk about this part I haven't been ready to talk about before. So the willingness of people to show up for themselves and their communities in this time has been one of the greatest tools we've had to draw from.
Amazing information, everybody. So with that being said, if we don't have any more input, I'm just going to make sure I open it up to my panelists one last time for that question. Again, what type of tools were used at your organization or other organizations that you've heard of to help people pivot and effectively service individuals? Okay. Just wanted to make sure I gave my panelists time to, again, close out if they had any closing thoughts around that. So what we're going to do now, we're going to actually jump right into panelist Q&A. So if there are any questions that the audience may have had or that you may have right now, you can feel free to throw them in the chat. You can look to your bottom right of your screen. You should see it says a chat option. When you look at chat, there should also be a Q&A option as well. We'll give some time for that. And as questions are possibly coming in, what I'm going to do is just ask the panelists, is there anything else that we are leaving out that needs to be addressed? Anything that you could think of that we may not have covered in terms of, again, sexual violence, disabilities, and any other intersection that may align with that?
You know, the number one thing I'm curious to hear from other panelists, and I hope this lines up with participants' questions too, is after the last year, have you noticed anywhere that you want to see your organization or this work that we're all doing go? Like, what are the pivots that you're seeing we need to make next?
Well, I'll take the question then. If I were to have my organization keep going down a particular road that we've gone down, I honestly would, I guess from a micro lens, I would keep the option for virtual therapy. And I believe that will open up more jobs for individuals, to be quite frank. I don't know about, funding or anything like that, but just thinking in terms of, I guess a societal, trying to pull us back out the mud standpoint. Yeah, that lets you know, hey, I have opportunities for jobs for individuals. Even if you can have part-time therapists, and just have them, hey, we have virtual sessions offered this time, and for the rest of the week, if you want to be in person, we have these sessions, Monday through Friday or whatever the case is. So that would be one way that I would love to just keep getting us to keep going in that direction. Let's get some more counselors, and let's get some more positions open, because again, now we have that, like you said, we have opportunity here now. We have the option to do in person as well as virtual. So that was really cool, again, from just a resiliency pivoting standpoint. And to be honest, I would like for just a personal thing for me, I guess you could say, as well as professional. I would like for to keep diving into calling more male identified individuals and anybody who's been socialized under that masculinity umbrella, which is pretty much all of us. So I want to call more of those individuals in so that we can start to again keep, or not start to, but continue to aggressively uber aggressively attack sexual violence from the other lens. Prevention is one thing, intervention is one thing, but prevention is also from the other end too, where we're telling all these individuals about risk factors, but we're not telling individuals who may be socialized again under this, why they look at the people who were in Katie's Perry video the way they look at. We want to I want to get at those individuals and keep chipping at that iceberg. So those would be the things that I would want, just to continue to attack prevention from that way, as well as, open the floor up for more jobs. Therapists, they're so important, and it's not enough, to be quite honest, it's not enough of them to go around. So
I think those are great points. And Katie, I think that you posed a great question there. Like, what are we doing well, and how can we kind of keep doing it moving forward? I wanted to thank the participants for choosing to join this session. I think this is an excellent first step. A lot of times people shy away from this topic. Even the title of the panel discussion is a little bit disarming, and I'm very happy that everyone chose to join this. And I think that if anything arose from the COVID-19 pandemic, we all kind of had this collective shared trauma where a lot of people maybe reached out for help when they normally wouldn't have, because they felt like they weren't in it alone, or they felt like there were more resources handed to them. So I think having these types of conversations is really important. Even just joining a discussion like this to talk about the different dynamics of sexual violence and how it affects different communities is super important. I did want to touch on, I know Dana asked in the chat, do people get confused about where they should report? So to report child abuse in Pennsylvania, you should report it to Pennsylvania Childline. And I know that in your question, you talked about like an LGBT agency as well. So when it comes to Childline reports, if you're a mandated reporter, you're required by law to report it no matter what. And then from Mission Kids, we provide a safety net of other services. So this is a great kind of beginning of collaboration with other agencies that we can also work with them to support different communities, whether it's someone who recognizes as LGBTQ, or if it's someone with a disability or someone who needs other types of services, we can work that way. And Katie, I didn't know if you wanted to speak from the other perspective as well.
Absolutely. What I can say is that every single county in Pennsylvania has a sexual assault center that is designated to support survivors of any type of sexual violence. And all of us have really invested in training to be competent in serving LGBT clients with disabilities, children, people who experience varying forms of oppression, even people who might be undocumented or have fears of immigration issues when they report. If somebody doesn't know where to go, they can always contact Childline directly. They can always contact their local sexual assault center. We all have 24/7 hotlines. But people who work for LGBT centers or daycares or your favorite teacher or your guidance counselor, they are also all mandated reporters. So at the end of the day, if there is somebody a survivor is most comfortable talking to, they can still talk to that person too. We might be that person. So the important thing for us is to step up and know how to direct a survivor from there.
I wanted to chime in really briefly. WAR also, Katie's absolutely correct. In WAR, we do a lot of cross collaboration as well. So here in Philadelphia, we have what we call the Mazzoni Center as well as the Attic Youth Center. Both are places where we have literally built the connection, collaboration with. Even got to the point where we have funding streams together to provide some of those services for and education, as well as counseling and support for individuals who may identify as LGBTQ. So again, that should be something that I'm sure, if you know, unless there's again that lack of resource in that area, that should be something that rape crisis center or sexual assault center should already be, you know, hands on and working with.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful start to our second day. I'd just like to especially thank all of the organizations and the panelists who made time to join us. The Sexual Assault Resource and Counseling Center, WAR, the Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence, the Norristown Vet Center, and Mission Kids Children's Advocacy Center of Montgomery County. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Very informative. Our next session will begin in 15 minutes at 10:15. You can hear from the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project on track 1, or track 2, you can talk with Jesse Turisky of the Autism Society of Pittsburgh. Thank you.